Hi everyone. I'm super happy to be here. I guess technically in this case here is just my lounge, but you know what I mean. I'm super happy to be hanging out with all of you. That's the cool bit about this talk, I guess. I'm currently pre-recording it, so future Cassie is in the chat and can talk to you while I'm doing the talk. It is a bit weird trying to do a talk without an audience though. I'm not really super used to this. So I have a bunch of Furbies that are going to serve as my audience today. So they're going to sit here. And I've also got some sound effects because it's really weird talking to yourself and not having people respond. So we've got some impressed oohs. And we've got some disappointed. Hopefully my imaginary audience won't be making too many disappointed noises, but excellent. So I'm all set up. I guess that we should crack on with this. So I guess the polite way to start a talk is an introduction. So I'm Cassie. And as my website says, I like making fun, interactive things with code. Invariably, those things involve SVG because SVG is the best. I've also recently joined the team at Greensock as the lead bestower of Animation Superpowers, which is a totally legit and not made up job title. So, as I was saying, SVG. SVG is my favourite thing, and hopefully by the end of this talk you'll all be pretty excited about it too. So I guess we should start at the beginning. Right now, when I say SVG, what do you think? You can tell future me in the chat, or the chat, I don't know where the chat is. Wherever the chat is, you can tell future me. So I'm guessing there will be answers kind of along these lines. Animation, icons, vectors, flat graphics, illustrations. I throw SVG workshops, and going on the small sample group that's attended a few of my SVG workshops, the most common thing that seems to come to mind is responsive vector illustrations. So SVG is great for that, after all. SVG stands for Scalable Vector Graphic, so it's great at making graphics for the web. That's scale. Speaking very broadly here, a lot of the time designers will make SVG illustrations in a graphics editor, like Illustrator or Affinity Designer. And then they'll pass these assets over to a developer. So I've spoken to a lot of front-end devs in my workshops who've never even really opened an SVG file. The majority will maybe open them, take a look, stare in horror at the wall of numbers that gets auto-generated out of graphics editing software, maybe bosh it through SVG OMG or SVG min or something to tidy it up, but ultimately kind of try not to think too hard about it. I've heard Sarah Drasner referring to SVG as number garbage, and although I love SVG, that is a pretty accurate way to describe it. But I kind of find this number garbage really exciting. And the main reason that I find it really exciting is because of this overlap between design and dev. So SVG is both a graphics format that you can design in graphics editing software, and it's also a markup language. So it's code that you can kind of tinker around with and play with. My friend Richard, he actually said this in a talk and I stole it from him. He explained it very eloquently and it's now my quote that I use in talks. So he says that SVG is an alternate universe version of HTML focused on graphics instead of documents. I really love that. I'll let that sink in for a second. So it's like a markup language for graphics. Now, I personally came from a design background, so when I started learning how to code, this was a mega exciting discovery for me. Like, it meant that I could draw stuff in Illustrator or Affinity Designer or a graphics editing program of some sort, and then take the outputted code and mess around with it. Like, it was a really fun starting point. Like, graphics are infinitely more fun than just a couple of paragraph tags or something. So yeah, it meant that I could mess around with it, and mess around with it I did. I made this little wobbly jellyfish dude using CSS animations and SVG filter effects. I also made this color changing chameleon. So this is taking pixel data from a webcam feed, rendering it to canvas, and then finding the average of all of those pixels. And then I'm using GreenSock for the animation. I just get to decide when you do ooze. This is great. I also made this little dancing blob. He gets shy when a webcam detects a face. So I was using the Chrome face detection API, which was behind a flag at this point. I don't know whether it's in browsers now. It's a bit dystopian and terrifying. But yeah, he gets shy when he sees a face. So basically I made a lot of stuff. And as you can see, the majority of that stuff was entirely pointless and completely just for fun. Or so I kind of thought at the time. Because as I was messing around, I just started to see SVG everywhere. And it started off with noticing really clever uses of animated SVG mixed up with HTML DOM elements. We'll play this one again because it is amazing. So mixing up SVG with semantic DOM elements, making these kind of supercharged, mega whimsical components on the web. This was actually live, like really, really live on the CSS Tricks site. I almost had a joy aneurysm when I saw it. Big shout out to Adam Kuhn for this one. And Aaron Eicher is also the king of this kind of stuff. Like, look at this button. It's such a good button. What a good button. But I know that this kind of thing, although mega joyful and utterly fantastic, isn't really what most of us deal with day to day for the majority of websites. And I think this is one of the reasons why maybe SVG is like deprioritized by a lot of developers. Like, it's for whimsical graphics and animations, right? And I'm not a designer. I don't need to know that. Or I don't do illustrations. I don't view myself as artistic. I don't need to learn that. And I think what most of us deal with day to day for the majority of websites is HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. So we've got structural, presentational, and behavioral. And we all have varying approaches, of course. Everyone that's listening to this talk will have a different approach. There's all sorts of frameworks and techniques and opinions. But at the end of the day, no matter what you use, no matter what part of the stack is your favorite, no matter how convoluted you make the tooling side of things, this is what's being output to the browser. Like, this is what we have to affect the final thing that the user is going to be interacting with. But we also have SVG. And by understanding what it brings to the table, we can unlock like a whole extra world of styling possibilities. It's such a useful tool to have in your belt. And I really believe that it isn't just for illustrations and icons. Like, it's really worth learning. You can use features within SVG to apply visual effects to both SVG and HTML elements. So it allows us to style things in ways that we can't with CSS. I'm gonna do an ooh. Whoa. So in fact, a lot of the core features that we have today in CSS were imported from SVG. So they started out as features in SVG. So masking and clipping, for instance, they've been part of SVG since 2000, I think. And CSS filters, they are a really small, simplified subset, basically the boring ones of what we have available to us with SVG. And we also have a whole bunch of other stuff that we don't have with CSS. So we have patterns and paths and shapes to play with. Right, another ooh. And SVG is not just purely presentational either. SVG is also a structural markup language. So just like HTML, going back to Richard's quote about it being an alternate universe version of HTML for graphics instead of documents. So we have structural elements within SVG, and we also have structurally external elements, like image and foreignObject. So we can have external content referenced inside an SVG, which is pretty exciting. SVG can also be traversed by screen readers. This is one of my favorite things about SVG because I love animating on the web, but a lot of ways that you can animate on the web aren't accessible. Like Canvas is just a black box without JavaScript, and screen readers can't access anything that you draw or animate inside of it. Whereas with SVG graphics and SVG animations can be traversed by screen readers because they have a DOM. So we can even add ARIA labels on graphical elements to infer more meaning. So that's pretty exciting. This is a lot to take in, so we'll step back a little bit. I'm just gonna have a glass of water. So there's this wonderful article by Chris Coyier, a little bit old now, called Your Brain on Front-End Development. And I really loved this when I first read it. Like, it really gave me a kind of good understanding of how different people look and break down a design. And Chris Coyier says that when he looks at a design, his brain starts triggering all sorts of things that he knows about and knows will be related to the task. So there's all sorts of things here, like, what have we got? Multi-line padded text and flexbox headers and stuff like that. Oh, my laptop died. Okay, wait 2 seconds. Cassie. We're gonna barrel through. It's fine. Fuck's sake. So there's this wonderful article by Chris Coyer called Your Brain on Front-End Development, where he talks about how he breaks down a design. And he says that when he looks at a design, his brain starts triggering all sorts of things that he knows will be related to the task. So there's all sorts of good things in here. There's like multi-line padded text, flexbox headers, all sorts of things. So this is what we're going to do. We're going to kind of look at some things that you might commonly find in a design, but we're going to put on our SVG hats, and we're going to see how we'd approach a bunch of different things. I really should have got a hat for this bit. I missed a trick. I didn't get a hat, but this little tiny owl has a hat. So we're just going to have a little owl break before we get stuck in. I think we all deserve an owl break. So let's start with something small. This is a little tooltip. Now, if we were approaching this without our SVG hat on, we might make a little div, background white, border radius, and then think about how we make a triangle. Now, I have to Google this every time, and it still doesn't really make sense to me. There's something about intersecting borders being triangular on divs, and if you make them 0 height and 0 width, you end up with a triangle. But triangles are a pain in CSS. Making complex shapes with DOM elements in general is a pain. You have to do all sorts of weird hacks with borders and box shadows, and it just feels a bit hacky. And I mean, it's right, because it is a bit hacky. HTML is made for documents, and SVG is made for shapes and graphics. So if we were to make a triangle in SVG, how do we do it? Well, we start off by making an SVG and defining a view box. So the view box is a little bit like saying, hey SVG, make me a grid of paper 100 units wide by 100 units high. And now these aren't pixel units, these are SVG units, so they scale responsively no matter what size you make the SVG. And this is the area that we can draw SVG elements on. So then we can use a polygon to draw from 0, 0 to 10, 0, and then to 5, 10, and it joins up automatically. So that's the lot. You just plot things on a coordinate system. It's kind of just like a piece of grid paper. So this isn't hugely exciting. It is just a triangle. But the fact that SVG has an internal coordinate system that you can plot stuff onto is really exciting. Because it means that we can use SVG to plot stuff onto responsive grids. Like literally anywhere we want. We've got a whole new layout system at our disposal. And now obviously no one's going to be swapping out Flexbox or CSS Grid in favour of boshing everything into an SVG. That would be madness. But for stuff like image grids, this is really ideal. Like image grids with overlapping areas. So if we had an image grid like that, we could plot those rectangles really nicely on the SVG grid. So this little green boy, the top corner is at 60, 60. So X 60, Y 60, and it's 40 wide and 40 high. And then we've got a picture of a puppy inside, which you can't see yet. And then we've got the blue one, is 30 on the x-axis and y 0, so here, 70 wide and 40 high. And you know, with CSS Grid you can overlap areas. It's a little bit tricky if you're not used to it, and the browser support isn't super great yet. But with SVG Grid, you can just plot everything wherever you like. So yeah. We can scale these images too in a similar way to background size contain and background size cover, by using preserve aspect ratio. So slice means scale this image up and chop off the excess. Meet means scale me up until I meet the edges of my container. And then we can use xmid, ymid, or xmin, ymax, like the x and y values, to position the image in the container. So it is like the SVG universe version of background size cover and background size contain. So what about an image grid like this? This is a little bit more complicated. Now there's two sides to this. We've got a bunch of shapes, which we know SVG does really well. You could make them in a graphics editor, or you could hand draw them if you were feeling brave. And then we've got an image which is clipped within a large shape in the middle. So we've got an image positioned within the SVG. We've got a path for that shape, and then we're using that shape path to clip that image. So you can see in the example here. Now we do have clipping in CSS now too, but for this kind of thing I really love the tidiness of keeping it within SVG. Plus there's loads more browser support for clipping in SVG. We've even got Internet Explorer. And I've seen in the past people treating graphics like this as just one large image. So the image of the puppy and all of the shapes, they'd all be exported out as, say, one big PNG with transparent background. And now that makes it really hard to swap out the image in future iterations, and transparent PNGs are really horrible file-wise. So if you do this kind of thing with SVG, you don't have to worry about transparency. You can pull a JPEG in from a CMS, and the file size from the SVG itself is going to be really nice and small. So it's a really nice, tidy solution. Best of all, you can define fills and stroke colors on SVG elements as CSS variables. So I do this on my site for any like graphics or information in my blog posts, because I have a dark theme. So if you've got a dark theme, your graphics can change along with your theming, which is really nice. You can also step it up a little notch, because SVG is really good for animations. So you can animate elements within a clip path. You can also animate elements that are being clipped, or clip paths themselves. So that's perfect for adding little animation touches like this. I'll play that again because I really like it. And as I said, so you can animate whatever shapes you want within a clip path. The clip path element, anything that you put inside that, any graphical element, the geometry will be used to cut out the image that you apply it to, or the element that you apply it to. So in this case, I've got a little wobbly clip path, and then the liquid masking effect works by moving the wobbly shape, transforming it up and across. So you get this swooshy liquid effect. We haven't done an ooh in a while. Thank you. So as I said a little while back, we can do clipping in CSS. We've got clip path polygon is one way to do clipping, but as you can see, you get kind of a lot of straight edges when you use polygons. And clipping with SVG paths allows us to make really nice smooth curves. So when I see clips like this, I immediately think SVG. So now you might be thinking, okay, that's all good and well, but this is a whole bunch of images, and wrapping every single image in an SVG sounds like a pain in the bum. And you would be right. But you can apply SVG clips to HTML elements as well. So they don't have to be inside an SVG. So for the best browser support, and by best I mean across the board, including Internet Explorer browser support, the SVG with the clip has to be included in the web page, but it can be visually hidden, like position absolute it and yeet it off the page somewhere. The one issue here is that clip path in CSS needs a unit range from 0 to 1 for all the path points specified in the clipping path. So we can see by looking at the view box here that the points are all falling within this range, 191 wide, 210 high. So not the range that we need 0 to 1. So we can fix this by dividing 1 by the viewbox values and then applying a transform to the clip path itself. So we've got transform scale 0.005 to whatever those numbers are. They look like magic numbers, but they're not. They are 1 divided by the viewbox values. And then once we've added that, we've got lovely responsive clip paths that we can apply to any element we like using CSS. We've also got an easier kind of SVG in CSS solution. Unfortunately, this isn't across the board support yet. We don't have Android or Internet Explorer. But this way, all we need is some SVG path data. And then we bosh that path data right in our CSS clip path declaration. And then CSS handles all of the scaling automatically, which is pretty awesome. Ooh. So the fact that SVG paths allow us to make gentle curves is really great because so much of the web is rectangular. Like everything's a rectangle, and digital mediums can feel quite harsh and like digital. So SVG paths feel a bit more organic. They can be really nice for adding softness and fluidity to a design. This is a really great demo from George Francis, where he shows off the difference between squircles and border radius. Like, what are squircles? Everyone says. Squircles are like squarish circles, so they're rounded all the way round instead of only at the corners. Think the new Apple icons. I also see a lot of websites kicking about with these wave dividers or background accents. And wavy dividers are just shouting out for SVG and either kind of clipping or masking. There's even this site that I found called getwaves.io, which allows you to make different SVG waves. You can, get some really wobbly ones. So if you ever need some waves, you can just get some waves from getwaves.io. They're not sponsoring me. And once you have waves, if you wanted, you could morph the path data of those shapes to make jazzy effects like this. Shout out to Blake Bowen for this demo. I really love it and I wish that I'd made it myself. So this example is using GreenSock to tween the values in the D attribute. GreenSock's very good for morphing. Morphing can be quite a tricky thing to accomplish just with JavaScript. So these kind of effects, again, might be getting into the yes, that's very cool, Cassie, but where am I really going to use that territory? But this is a little mobile modal that I made on the Made by Many site, and dialed down a little bit, it can actually be quite a nice subtle technique for mobile menus or transitions between pages. And because you can morph between paths, you can create kind of squidgy interactions, like this very squishable button. So I'm a really big fan of micro interactions like this. I think that they add a really nice, playful human quality to interfaces. And I really love that when I go to a website and it feels like a human has made it, that there's maybe a little bit of a sense of humour behind some of the design choices. So this is made using GreenSock and GreenSock's Morph SVG plugin. It's got very good browser support and allows you to morph between shapes no matter the number of points, which is usually the tricky thing. But we can also, this is very exciting, we can also morph between SVG paths using CSS in Chromium browsers now. But if it's just a little progressive enhancement, that's okay. It's pretty exciting. It's a little more finicky. You have to have paths with exactly the same number of path points in order to transition between them. I didn't have that when I was setting up this demo, so I couldn't add an ease. But yeah, the fact that it exists is just super exciting. So it's definitely a good one to play around with. Animating SVG paths can lead down some pretty fun rabbit holes too. This is a completely nonsense example. I can't help myself, I'm really sorry. But look how cute it is. It's like it's ticklish. So yeah, SVG paths are just tons of fun to play around with. It's a really good rabbit hole to go down. So back in the more serious world, what about this accent underline here? So this is fun. We can animate SVG paths to make them look like they're being drawn in. So we call that stroke animation. Stroke animations are also my favorites. I have a lot of favorites, but stroke animations can be really impactful as a big part of the design, or just used as an accent. So I recently made this site for UX Fest, and it's got a really big stroke animation that kind of leads people down the page. So in order to do this, we have to have a stroke on a path, and that stroke is dashed, and then we animate the offset of that dash. So you can see this looks like a bunch of tiny little worms wriggling along a path. But in order to do stroke drawing where it looks like the path's being drawn in, you just make the dash the whole length of the path. So we don't have variable width paths in SVG, so we can fake this variable width thing with clipping. So we animate the path, the dash offset, and clip the stroke. So this is all you need in your CSS to do a really simple stroke animation. It's not a lot of CSS at all. The cool trick here actually is path length equals 1. This sets the underlying kind of maths for the path, the kind of unit that all of the calculations are being made of. So rather than having to work out how long the stroke is that you've drawn, you can just set it to 1, and then all of your dash array and dash offset values will fall between 0 and 1. So it makes it a lot easier to deal with. So let's take another look at this design. These background dots. this is another great use case for SVG. So this is one of my favorite SVG elements. I need to stop saying favorite. All of them are my favorite, but it's one of my favorite SVG elements. It's the pattern element. So this allows us to draw shapes and then tile those shapes, whatever you've drawn, across an area as a fill. Like, it's definitely the most complicated way to do fills in SVG. But we can use this to make simple background patterns, and we can fill those background patterns on large areas or just fill in smaller shapes. So you can use the pattern element to make all sorts of crazy patterns. I'm going to go past the slide really quickly because it's hurting my brain right now. You can even animate elements within a pattern. So yeah, I genuinely have yet to find a real world use case for animated background patterns, but it's really cool that you can do it. The best use case for patterns, in my opinion, is this subtle kind of background texture. I really like this site, Hero Patterns. They provide loads and loads of subtle background patterns that you can use in your designs. You can apply them as a data URI. So that's putting the whole SVG inside a data URI, and then you can use it as a background image. But you can also download the SVG file. So if you're not too comfortable with SVG, you can download it and have a look and see how the patterns are made. I'm a big fan of just, breaking things and playing around with things to learn. And it's obviously super fun making your own patterns too. Another cool thing that we have in SVG is filters. And now duotone filters are a little bit like 4 years ago or something, but it's a good example. So we have filters in CSS, sure, but those are a small subset of simplified filters that are available to us in SVG. So with SVG filters, we really get to go under the hood and kind of make our own filters just in any way that we want to. Filters work by combining a different number of filter primitives, and there are loads of filter primitives and you can combine them in any way you can think of. So there's like an infinite number of cool visual effects that you can create. I really like this tool. I recently just found it, and it's really great if you're trying to wrap your head around how filters work. It's got this kind of draggy drop max MSP type thing going on, and you can see how the filters work by chaining them together. So you kind of pipe pixel data through filters, and the output of one filter you'll plug into the next one. Each filter primitive pipes data along to the next one. So yeah, it's a really good GUI to have a play around with if you're learning. So they're really fun to mess about with, and they're also super useful because you can define image effects in code rather than having to rely on people uploading images with the right treatments to a CMS, because we all know that doesn't happen. So right here we've got this section. This is where all of the cool stuff is actually. These table values, they aren't actually magic numbers. You take the RGB values of 2 different colors, you divide them by 255 because that's the number of bits you have in a byte. And then you get these numbers. So the first one of each of these, I can't make this any wider, it's annoying. So these are the first color values, and then the second ones are the second color values. I've put all the links to my code pens if you want to have a little play around. We can also apply filters to HTML elements as well. So this is a classic from Lucas Beber. It's using a really clever mixture of blurring and alpha contrast to kind of blend elements together so they look gooey. So you can do stuff like this. And now SVG filters are notoriously not very performant to animate, but if you're doing small interactions like this that are over within like a second, I think that's perfectly fine. You just don't want to be animating SVG filters over a large area in a kind of infinite way. And again, we can apply SVG filters to text. This is super useful because although the text here is all jazzed up, it's got, it's still accessible for screen readers. So with this filter, we're extruding the text, we're flooding that area with the color purple, and then we're using convolve matrix, which nobody really understands. This is a 16 pixel kind of extrusion made with convolve matrix. The number of zeros are also related to the number that you put into this value here. I feel like SVG filters are like wild horses, and you can never really tame them, but with enough love and patience, they will let you along for the ride. Back in design land, another thing that I see a lot, especially in scrolly telling sites or blog posts, are graphics with information in, kind of like graphs or images with text inside. And a lot of the time I see them being saved out as PNGs or JPEGs. And this brings me to the coolest and my most favorite of all the SVG elements we're looking at today. The foreignObject tag. So the foreignObject tag allows us to add proper semantic HTML content inside an SVG. And this is HTML content that can be styled with modern CSS. So if you needed, you could create flexbox layouts within an SVG, or you could have wrapping text. And we can also, more importantly, make sure that our graphics are accessible. So we can allow screen readers to traverse the whole SVG DOM by setting role equals group. You have to be careful with that because you have to make sure that the content within your SVG is accessible if you are adding that. You can also add title and description tags, which are treated quite similarly to alt text. And right here, this is our foreignObject tag. And inside it, we've got heading, we've got some paragraph text, and we've got a proper button. So let's do a demo.
foreignObject in SVG. Infographic, an important infographic. Group. This is some very important graph info. Heading 1. It's actually HTML inside an SVG. You can access this information with a screen reader because SVG is hella cool. This is a glorious tabbable button element. Button.
So yeah, I think that that's super cool, the fact that we can create accessible graphics and infographics with SVG. So that's the lot. I hope you've really enjoyed taking a look at the web with SVG in mind, and I hope that after this maybe you'll spot a clever way to use SVG in one of your upcoming projects. It definitely deserves more than being relegated to icon sets that no one looks at forever. So we've covered a lot today, but we've also barely scratched the surface. So if you've enjoyed this and you want to dig a little bit deeper, I have a monthly newsletter that I co-write with my friend Louis, and you can sign up and see the back catalogue at viewbox.club. So you can subscribe. You can even buy us a coffee if you'd like. I also run online SVG workshops, so you can find out more about that on my site if you're interested. Also, if you're on Twitter, first of all, I'm really sorry about that, but you can also follow me at Cassie Codes. Hopefully I'll inject some joy into your feed. Thanks very much for having me, folks. My dog has just woken up. What wonderful timing. He was asleep the entire talk. So future me will be kicking around in the chat to answer any questions you have. Don't hesitate to reach out. So I'll try and get Brody to come over here. Brody, come over here. Come over here, buddy. Come say hi. Aww. There we go. That's the lot. Thanks, everyone.